Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Whatcom County Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force Steering Committee meeting for April 10th, 2024. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all events. Again, thanks for being here. We had this time change. I guess we will get right into it. The first item we have is the Justice Project element, community health assessment. And we have Lynette and Amy here to talk to us. I'll turn it over to them.
Great, thank you for having us and reaching out regarding this. I know Perry, when he reached out, sent the ordinance that talks about your order, I guess, to participate and or create an assessment around safety and correction. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy, who is our expert in this area.
Yeah, so good morning or good afternoon, I guess. Amy Hockenberry, Health Information Assessment Supervisor. I can share a little bit about our work around community health assessments, and then we'll see what questions you all have in relationship to what's in the ordinance. So community health, Whatcom County Health and Community Services will be producing, and we do produce countywide community health assessments every 5 years, but right now we're a little delayed. So we're looking at publishing our next community-wide county health assessment, or CHA, in 2025. When we do so, we'll be looking broadly across a whole host of health factors. So we look at socioeconomic factors, health behaviors, healthcare access. And one of those sub areas within our community health assessment, we'll be looking at community safety and violence. And so the next CHA will have that focus. And by and large, the purpose of a community health assessment is to look at how health is being experienced broadly across our community, but also among and between populations to help advance equity. And a part of our development of that assessment is a series and range of community engagement. And so we will be reaching out and soliciting input from subject matter experts in all the different areas in which the assessment will focus in on, but specifically around community safety and violence. So when we are ramping up to do our assessment, we will be, you can trust that we'll be reaching out to this task force and other subject matter experts within the community safety and violence field to help inform that section of the community health assessment. So I hope that's enough information to tell you a little bit about what and how we would approach our next assessment. And I guess I should be curious if you have any questions or thoughts around what that might look like for all of you and the task force.
Questions, comments? Dan.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. How do you assess violence? Is that like physical assaults? Is it domestic violence? Is it sexual assaults? What are the metrics there?
Yeah, it's all across the board. So right now our data team is building an online data platform that is heavily quantitative population level data. Off the top of my head, we are looking at sexual assault, violent crime, domestic violence. We're looking at child abuse and neglect, incarceration rates. So just off the top of my head. So those are those population level indicators that we consider. And then in the community health assessment, one of its designs is to take a deeper dive. And so we'll be looking at areas for where is there different programmatic data we should be considering, but also is there additional quantitative or qualitative data that we should gather to help further understand any of those health issues.
Thank you.
Sheriff Tank.
Yeah, so my question was very similar to Dan's, but I guess going further, the past report, I'm assuming that that's online, and going forward, has there been any reach out with the sheriff's office with regard to those stats?
Yeah, oh, sorry, somebody jump in. Okay. Yes, the last report is online. It is 2018, so it's a bit old data. And even when we published it in 2018, most recent data in that report was usually 2016 or 2017. And we've just started some preliminary outreach with the sheriff's office around some of those crime data as it relates to the online data platform that we're building, not yet around a health assessment.
So
Thank you.
this is probably something that's going to be work closely with this new data team that is being assembled to do criminal justice data work. So they'll be, drilling down and focusing right on, specifically on the criminal justice side of data. Now it's not an operation yet, and I don't know how far along it'll be. You said 2025, right? Is when you're doing the assessment?
Yeah, we're looking to publish in 2025, and it will take 12 to 18 months to develop it. And I guess given my role on the index committee and part of my data team, we can make sure that we're staying in connection with the data team that you're particularly referencing about deeper analysis specifically around the justice system.
Yeah, I forgot you were connected to Index, so yeah, you'd be aware of that. Great, thanks, Amy. Mike?
Thanks, Barry. And Amy, thanks for the presentation. I've data mined those reports for years, and they have interesting offshoots that people don't always think, but sometimes they're useful for grants, right? So when you talk about community need and geographic need, they're really crucial. So thanks, Drew. I'm curious, and I didn't hear this mentioned, and I might have just missed it, but what are you capturing in the way of substance use issues, violence associated with that, but even just the issues of substance use and overdose and things of that nature?
Yeah, in the most recent data that we've been retrieving and analyzing, it's been across the board. We're in assessment world, we're always looking as broadly as possible across all the areas of public health. So we are looking at opioids, alcohol use, marijuana use, tobacco use, all those substances, and then our overdose deaths. So we're doing assessment within those areas, and that's often looking at retroactive long-term trend data. And then if I know you're all aware of the Whatcom, I think you're all aware of the Whatcom Prevention Overdose.org, where then we're providing more real-time medical examiner data that's specifically to the opioid overdoses. So those are the two. If there's more kind of weeds in there, Mike, that I can share with you probably at a later date, but we're looking across the board across all those different substances.
Peter?
Thanks, Amy. How would you characterize how you're expanding from the last report, what it is that you're going to be reporting on? And then also, what opportunities do the people on this call have for getting input in for what it is that you are tracking?
Yeah, couple. To answer your first question, by and large, we've been still using our population framework and health framework that does look across the social determinants of health. Of course, there are these merging issues. They're not as emerging, but climate change, opioid crisis, where we're taking a little bit deeper dive and working with our colleagues across the state too. And how does public health measure these elements? As far as engagement with this group, I see us being able to, when we are building our community engagement plan, as we're designing our next CHA, this task force, which I know a lot of you sit in multiple hats in multiple groups, we'll be looking to engage all the different various task force networks, coalitions in the review of data, be able to help us make a meeting interpretation in the context of the data. The one thing that CHA allows us to do too is to prioritize and examine where should we take a deeper dive and have richer understanding or deeper understanding with any one health topic. So this could be a conversation we're having with all of you. And I think that speaks to what Barry was just mentioning around this data group. There's more of a deep dive within the justice system. What of those are measurements that's applicable to public health and what isn't public health per se, right? It's more of the justice system. And so there'll be those conversations about where do these data stewardship places live. So I don't know if that answers your question. By and large, lots of community engagement and input.
Well, that's great to hear that you have a great engagement plan for compiling your next CHA. So any other questions? Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. I've got a follow-up one since we've got you here. It's something cropped up, and when you talked about ability to drill down, the one thing I think about is geographically. And depending on how we capture data up front, right, it changes how far we can drill down. And some data that we put down to school district, which is just not, it's really not granular enough. Can you speak to like how or what kind of framework or methodology you all use to be able to parse things out? And we've got such differences in our county between what's happening in East Whatcom, right, and what's happening in city of Bellingham and around. And I think the ability to parse that by demographic and then by issue would be really critical. But I'm not even sure what kind of methodology you use, if it's the same as it was before, or what you can comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is probably one of the more exciting parts of doing our next CHA is to be a little bit more dynamic in how we're disaggregating and looking at health disparities among subpopulations. Yeah, in our last CHA, we really kind of just honed in on school district boundaries for a few reasons, and that was limiting. So I am excited for this next round to be a little more diversified. It is 100%, and I think I want to make sure this is super clear. Our ability to disaggregate is 100% reliant on the data source. So if the data, by the way the data is collected and the way we can retrieve it, it really dictates how we can disaggregate. So whether or not if it's by geography or income or education or race, ethnicity, gender, those things, it is very much dependent on that data source. So a base of public health is to advance equity. So when possible, we are disaggregating data by those subpopulations. But it is, again, very contingent. It is 100% contingent on how that data source is available to us. And small numbers and analysis, but mostly how the data comes.
Anybody else have anything they want to ask? Heather, I see your mic went off. I was
I
looking
know,
right at
it
you
did.
too.
Hi,
All
Amy.
right,
It's
kind of
nice
froze
to
there.
excuse me. It's nice to see you, Amy. I am wondering if you could share a little bit about the process and what are you guys doing right now to prepare for the CHA? Who's going to be like, and the last time you did this, it was really incredible. I remember a very deep qualitative component of the CHA. Or is that part of this time, and who's helping determine what populations you're speaking to? And is there an opportunity for us to suggest, hey, maybe formerly incarcerated individuals could be a population that you reach out to, or people working in the jail or people working in opioid treatment, right? And then curious about the timeline for if that's still part of the plan, what that timeline is, and then the quantitative piece, and how does it culminate and where will we find it and how do we stay engaged?
Yeah, those are all very good questions. I say, in all transparency, we actually haven't started to build the concrete plan for the next CHA. We did some preliminary work about a year ago, put that on pause. I'd say the work we've been doing is primarily right now has been focusing on this online data platform that is the quantitative data. This will serve as our backbone of a majority of the quantitative data that we will use for the next CHA. Right now, it doesn't include everything, as it's going to be a work in progress. And so we have still yet to lay those plans as far as how we're going to develop the next CHA, let alone that engagement process. But the one added value of us doing this uplift or this heavy front work on quantitative data, I trust that when we're working on this CHA, we then can have more resources and staffing time dedicated to that qualitative data collection, which thanks for saying that, it was that you appreciated the last report. I aspire to do even richer and more meaningful qualitative data gathering this time around, and go above and beyond what we were able to do back in 2018.
Well, we wouldn't want your goal to be anything else. So thank you for that. Jill?
Thank you, Barry. I just wanted to remind everyone and let our new IPRTF members know that the facilitator RFP and contract will include a task specifically for our new facilitator to collaborate with the health department in developing this component of the health assessment. So I think that will probably be the primary bridge between the IPRTF and the health department as they work through this.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful. Bertie, you had your hand up earlier. You're muted.
Thank you. My question got answered, so I lowered it.
I wondered if that might have been the case.
But I appreciate your observance.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, we'll move on to task force co-chair planning, and this is going to be Peter and Heather.
Heather, do you want to kick it off?
No, I don't. I'd love for you to
Okay.
kick it off. Thank you.
Okay. Sure. Well, for one thing, we are absolutely delighted, and I know I can speak for Heather with this, to be co-chairs, and we have roped Bertie Safford into our co-chairmanship, chairpersonship rather, and the three of us have been meeting and talking quite a bit. We had a very good 3-hour session last week in Heather's offices where we did a lot of planning and planning to plan. We are wanting to put together a plan for the year, and that is that is a critical component, I think, to our common goal of wanting to move things forward with the IPR in ways to focus on action. And we have so many good planning documents. This group has just done such an excellent job. There is no doubt in putting forward the implementation plan, the work of the BGAT. I was just referring to the other day. The gap analysis was absolutely it's stellar work, and there's just so much that we already know that we need to do and we need to get done. And Heather and I and Bertie are dedicated to the idea of helping this group, all of the committees, to have excellent process to move forward towards action. So I'd say that is kind of the overall. We are also meeting with each of the committees, the three of us, and sitting in this month to do a careful listening, and an open, honest conversation with everyone around what their experience with their committee and the IPR is, and looking for opportunities and how we can reshape things, are in process to get more done, to respect people's time, and just looking for any of that feedback that we possibly can get. So that's a little overview. Heather, do you have anything you'd like to add, or Bertie?
I think that's a great overview. And like Peter said, we're committed to attending all of the committee meetings for the first while, and we'd love to sort of divide and conquer in the future so that one of us is always there and present. And my brain is just such a, like, let's put it in a work plan brain, and what's the milestones and what are the goals. And so that's been a little bit of the orientation of the conversations. And I like going back to the beginning, especially when I'm new to a role, to say, what was the original scope and intention of what we were going to do, and what were the goals that we listed out? And then what are the 3 steps we can take for each of these goals? What are the next 3 steps? What's the next presentation to invite? What's the next discussion to tee up? Because there's so much opportunity still to achieve even more, and give that feedback and recommendations on outcomes of programs, and support the data that we need to get to make solid recommendations. And with the opportunity of the public health and sales tax, and that intersection with the incarceration task force work, I think there's just a really great opportunity to make a lot of progress on behalf of our community. And so I know that the last committee meeting we were able to attend together, we went to Index and we went to Legal and Justice. We did get feedback at both of those. Birdie, I don't know if you want to share anything specifically. We met specifically post-Index, and you may be prepared today. I believe Birdie is now officially the co-chair of the Index Committee, so congratulations. I think that happened,
Brings
yeah.
me here legitimately to this meeting. I know that Peter and Heather have graciously involved me. I'm a bit of an interloper, except for now being chair of the Index Committee. So I want to be respectful of the fact that I realize I'm not an elected co-chair of the task force. At the same time, I enjoy the interactions that we're having, and I think we have some good thought partnering. So yes, I was elected chair of the Index Committee, and we did use the opportunity last week to raise the mission statement originally, and then have discussions about what about the committee function has been helpful, what has been less helpful, what has become barriers. And we had, I think, a good open discussion, which then we took later, Peter, Heather, and I, and processed and came up with some recommendations, which is what we told the committee we would do. And so we're ready to bring the recommendations to the steering committee for your input, and with your approval, we would then take it to the next IPRTF task force to modify the structure a bit. So if Jill, if you wouldn't mind, I sent Jill a couple of things to show. So what we heard from the Index Committee was that they felt they were more functional when they had subcommittees, and they had a kind of a technical subcommittee where the folks that really do IT got together and did the work, and they felt that that allowed them to make more direct progress. And we're also aware that part of using data is what I call the customers of the data, you know, the people that can prioritize and say, this is what we think we need the most. This is what we're going to be looking at next. So we recommend dividing the Index Committee into two subcommittees. And as you can see here, the Index Committee would meet every other month, and the subcommittees would meet monthly. The one on the left would be the technical subcommittee, and its tasks are to get the requested data, and then a big issue is developing interoperability between all the different silos we have of data throughout the justice system and with the health department. So that would be their main task. And then we're calling it a policy subcommittee, which would be folks who understand data and how to use it, and would be able to prioritize the data that's needed for the particular programs that the IPRTF is wanting to look at and evaluate in the coming short time frame, and sort of help put that forward in hopefully workable chunks so that we just march onward with getting the data needed. And the other piece that we would hope the policy subcommittee would address is looking if there are policy changes needed in order to make the requested data available. Because assuming that it's available is always a bad assumption, in the sense that it relies on the folks that are inputting the data. So those are the two major pieces of the Index Committee. And then we imagine ad hoc work groups that would involve the appropriate people as we're looking at specific things. And there's a couple of examples that we have written out here. You know, we're going to use the police chiefs if we're looking at arrest data, Melora if we're looking at Grace and Lead. So the idea is to be inclusive, not exclusive. So I'd like to see if there's questions on this. The next piece I have to present is we did come up with a draft list of data that we would recommend prioritizing, but I would like to make sure that people get their questions answered about how we propose structuring the index committee, and that we welcome your input.
Great. Thanks, Bertie. We'll take questions on this piece. Mike?
Bertie, thanks for that. I'm excited. We've needed the index to be a little bit more functional, but I think a lot of it was not due to the membership or what they're able to do. It was just maybe not as coordinated as we needed to be, and obviously leadership changes. So
Thank you. Any suggestions?
Mike's locked up.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, continue, Mike. He's still locked up.
am I still locked up?
No,
You
no,
were.
no.
You just came out of hyperspace or whatever. So
Okay, yeah. How's this?
yeah, gotcha.
Okay. So what I was getting at, and I'll just sum it up quickly, Bertie, is a dashboard. And I think one of the things that was happening prior is we would make requests for data. We would get them, whether that be from Wendy Jones, chief of the jail, and it would happen, but there was this roundabout kind of long term, and it felt like a special request. And I think one of the things, as I've sat on the subcommittee for a long time and steering for a long time, we need data all the time. Like it really should be kind of at our fingertips. So I didn't see on the left-hand column, I do see interoperability. I like that. Figuring out what those sources are going to be really crucial. And I guess I would just highlight to you the history and how many calls we've had for a dashboard that would really give us the common set. And hopefully that is a dashboard that is useful well beyond just the IPRTF. We would not want to be the reason alone that some tool like that was created. But just to mention that it's, not just ad hoc reporting, but ongoing, regular, searchable data would be extraordinarily helpful. And thank you for the work you guys are doing.
Well, thank you. And thank you for that. I think you're 100% right. And as I'm not showing the kind of mapped out work plan because it's very draft and we feel like the committee needs input on what their work plan is going to be. At the same time, we definitely had develop a regular usable dashboard on this year's work plan. It's been a moving target to the point that we were afraid if we put it as kind of number one, it would stall because we don't even have a snapshot of data at this moment. But yes, I think that's uniformly our goal.
Dan.
Thanks for putting this together. My question is, how is GARE integrated into this process?
That's a really excellent question, Dan. And when the next thing I'm going to show you is the baseline data that we request. And one of the things that we're asking for is race and ethnicity, which is, in fact, why don't we just move to the next piece, if you don't mind, Jill?
Yeah, can I ask a question quick?
Yes,
First,
definitely. I'll get back to you, Dan, on that.
Sorry, Dan, I'm going to butt in here for a second. I recall the discussion during index committee, and they talked about how they were most efficient meeting these work groups. And I just want to make it clear. It looks like these are just going to be small, like task groups, right? Not necessarily a committee, but just a little task group that's going to meet independently and develop a set of recommendations that they would then bring to the full index at a public meeting. Yes?
I don't think we specifically addressed whether the smaller meetings would be public or not. And I think I would open that up to whoever. I don't think we had strong feelings, but the idea would be they would be standing subcommittees of the index committee, meet regularly, not on an ad hoc basis, but a way of dividing the work and then report to the index committee, which in turn reports to the IPRTF. So in many ways, the IPRTF is the ultimate customer of the index committee and really, we would expect, drives the overall arching plan of data. But this is the committee charged with actually getting the work figured out and doing it. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I appreciate that flow of who makes recommendations to whom makes sense to me. So I appreciate that. In terms of compliance with OPMA, that'll have to be a
Mhm.
conversation. I don't know if the committee wants to do it now, but that'll have to be a conversation in terms of staffing and things like that, so.
Right.
Yeah,
I
you know,
don't think I
that was gonna be
personally
my,
have,
that was gonna be my question too, is if do we get into this ground in other subcommittees where we start dividing and creating other meeting space? I think it's great, but how does that affect Jill's ability and our staff ability to have
Mhm.
OPMA meetings that, you know, meet the criteria of the ordinance that enable the IPTRF? So just want to be careful to make sure that we have the capacity.
Right. I don't think I have the expertise or knowledge about the depth of the open meeting. In order to answer that, I would have to rely on others. If anyone, do you want to resolve that today, or?
No,
want
that's
to-
okay. We don't need to resolve that
Just-
today.
okay.
We'll just
Okay.
keep that, front of mind, that we make sure that we
Yeah.
don't overwhelm our,
Yeah.
our ability
Okay.
to create meeting space. So.
No, that makes sense. So now to get back to Dan's point about GAIR, this is our recommended first step at data. It's not meant to be an all-inclusive list, but we have literally struggled to get any, and for obvious reasons. I mean, I think I entered the committee frustrated, but I certainly have heard a tremendous amount of work that has gone on and how far they have come. So the reality, however, is that we really don't have a snapshot of what's going on since back around the time of the Vera report, or Heather got a download of data in 2020 that she used an intern at the Chuckanuck Foundation to analyze and do some things with. So we thought that was a place to start, and we'd start with the booking and jail incarceration population, because that lives more than other things in one silo. I mean, I realize there are multiple sub-silos, but it's generally one place to look, and we know the data is there, with the exception of race and ethnicity, which of course is an important part of the public health CHA report and everything. So I highlighted it because this would be the one new piece of data that would have to be collected. Otherwise, we are looking to get a view of bookings, the disposition, who the incarcerated population is, what are the top felony, gross misdemeanor, and misdemeanor charges, and then a few additional pieces of data. Ultimately, this and much more would be on a dashboard. Does that answer your question, Dan?
Yeah, but it just leads to more questions. How
Of
are you
course.
doing? How are you doing aggregated charges? So you've got on your third bullet point under total bookings, it says charge, and then it lists some of the charges. How do you do multiple charges? How do you do multi-jurisdictional charges?
Absolutely.
How is that
Well,
represented?
Those are really good questions, which inevitably are going to come up when we put something like this forward. And I would say some of this, not all of it, but some of this is modeled on the data that the Vera report put out. And I realize that report was somewhat controversial, and I'm not suggesting we use it as the Bible, but it did have the charge things were as they reported it. So I think that would be the IT subcommittee technical part to make a decision. You know, my experience with data is you never can answer all the multiple questions. You just have to decide this is how we're defining it, and everybody needs to understand that that's how it's being done. But those are very important questions.
Peter.
Dan, as a policymaker, I often think of you. I think of Barry and others and I would turn the question around like, what do you need to know? What do you need to know to make sure that the programs that we are putting in place for incarceration prevention and reduction are working. The policy subcommittee is, I look forward to that conversation and getting some real work done around what it is that we're going to be looking for, what's going to be useful. And, you know, in reading back through all of the notes from each meeting, going back 5.5 years of index, there's some interesting things that I read. You know, it's very, very long lists of things that we'd like, but I'm not sure real work was done from the policy side of deciding what actually is needed and what's going to be helpful in navigating all the work that we have to do. So I look forward to sitting down with you and others to decide those very things.
Can I answer your question? So I have two examples. One is DWLS3 as a standalone charge. How does that work? That was being disposed of by the county prosecutor's office. So how does that work in district? How does it work when it's combined with other charges, including possession or other charges? And then that's example one. Example two is under bullet point 3 charges felony. That's the only one that will land a person into the county jail. The other two charges will not result in incarceration. So what happens? How are those cases disposed, and how are you measuring what that looks like? Are they integrated into treatment programs? Do they go into lead program? Like, what does that look like, and how are you measuring those outcomes? I guess would be my follow-up questions.
I guess what I would say is those are super important questions, and that's why we put this up kind of as a straw thing to start teasing it out. My experience is when you try to discuss data and you have a blank sheet, it's very difficult, but when you put something up for people to react to. So this would now go, we come to the steering committee to get your input. And so the question would be for your input for us is whether we actually bravely take a list like this to the IPRTF, or probably more preferably get the IPRTF's buy-off on this changing structure of the committee, and then take a list like this to the policy subcommittee to do exactly what Peter is saying, which is what's the information we need the most to help us with the most pressing questions.
You know, actually, Bertie, I don't think we're changing the committee at all. I don't think there's any action needed there, because the original discussions were exactly how you laid out. We just didn't get there.
Okay.
So I think we're good there. I think
Okay.
you're bringing back that idea and saying, hey, you know, this is what we really originally thought how we needed the work to be divided up, and let's get back to work on that. So I think we're good there.
Okay.
Heather?
First of all, I guess what I'd add is, I think we've observed that we get stuck in the conversation of, well, these systems don't talk to each other, and therefore we can't do anything. And so this initial list was thinking about specifically the jail. We know we have data, we have some data. So can we just start with, where do we have data, and can we make meaning out of the existing data before getting to that conversation of, well, Spellman doesn't talk to Gelada, doesn't talk to Epic at the hospital, so we don't know anything. And I know we have great booking data, but it's not meaningful when you have to go day by day and just look at a list of who got booked. We want to look at trends, right? And like what's working and what isn't working. And I could see doing this for all of the programs that we have put in place in the last 5 years to say, is LEAD working effectively and getting the outcomes that we want? Is the Crisis Stabilization Center, you know, getting the outcomes that we want? And even when we've gotten little bits of data, it's caused a lot of conversation that's really important about like who's actually using the Ann Deacon Center of Hope. Oh, it's mostly the hospital. Well, let's fix that, you know? If you'd like to, I can run through a couple of the slides from our little Chuckanut jail analysis, so I can show you, like, what do we even mean when we say what's meaningful data? Would that be helpful? I can do that really fast.
Sure, go ahead,
Yes,
Heather.
please.
Okay. I think that if Jill, if you have that up, I think you have to stop sharing before I can share. Because I guess when you were talking, Dan, about like, well, how would you do this, especially with multiple charges? There are ways to do it. And, if my intern can figure out pivot tables with a jail booking Excel spreadsheet, like, let's go back to that level of, we can do some of this by hand if we need to, just to demonstrate to the systems level people, here's what we're talking about, and can you help us get there? So, we had just month-to-month analysis. This was January 2020 to June 2021. I PDR'd all of the jail booking data. And so I got this massive Excel spreadsheet. And like, even seeing that's kind of interesting, right? To see the trends of bookings in the jail month by month. And then you can see kind of the impact of COVID too, right? Like March to April, but then we kind of crept back up. And anyway, this is a snapshot of time, but and then we did the top charges, the top 5 charges, and granted, this did not, at this stage, was not able to take into account multiple charges. This just was top charges overall. So warrants, DUIs, in from court, assault 4 DV, violation court order DV. And this was one of the issues with the Vera report, right? Was that a lot of people have 2, 3, or 4 charges stacked. And so what charge do you pick? But it's still interesting to look at just top charges generally anyway. And so then the top 10, you can start to see like DUI, that's a big problem. That's a huge booking issue in our community. What is the program and support and potentially even a different facility like a sobering center that could help relieve all of that really expensive throughput in the jail? It's expensive to book people in the jail, right? And we don't support people post DUIs and helping them not do it again very often or very well. Same with domestic violence, theft, driving while license suspended. So these, it helps you start conversations, right? About like, well, how could we reduce DUIs? Where do we need more DV prevention programs? Could we do something innovative with ride sharing apps at bars and things like that? So we were able to look at who's booking and by like each month even. So we know they collect who's bringing people to the jail, who's booking them. So this was Blaine in 2020, big jump in August, right? A little jump in November. And same with 2021. So that's kind of interesting to see like who's actually utilizing our jail. In January 2020, 40% was, let's see, that's probably 32% was Bellingham. I would expect 40% to be Whatcom County, but it's looking gray like Blaine. So that's interesting. But nonetheless, you can like get to that level of who is booking in the jail, what booking agency. And then what are the repeated offenses? The top 5 repeated offenses, right? So we're not doing a very good job of rehabilitating these people. Assault in the 4th degree, DUI, driving with license suspended, malicious mischief, and possession of a controlled substance. Those are the top 5 that continue to come back to the jail. And that's the count of repeated offenses there. You can look at length of stay. That's really interesting. Length of stay by charge too, to see like, is there equity in how our community is actually defining accountability and who stays in jail based on the seriousness of the charge versus ability to just pay to get out. And then we even drilled down into length of stay based on various assault charges to kind of see, like, is there any meaningful information to get there? Burglary, same length of stay based on various burglary charges. And then we even went down to like incidence ratios, which was a very statistical part of the presentation for each police department and their bookings. The average bail amount for each arrest type, arrest origins and use of courts. So even if the Bellingham Police Department arrests, what court do those charges end up going to? And then we did some correlation around what are the top warrants when there's a warrant out, what are those for? And we continue to see domestic violence and DUIs, right? Those are the top 2 charges, top 2 warrants out for arrest, top 2 bookings, and driving with license suspended and possession of a controlled substance. So one of the insights was obviously top charges of warrants look very similar to the top 5 repeated offenses. But again, then the incarceration task force conversation can become, well, what are we doing to help reduce and prevent these charges and these incidences from happening? What programs do we need focused on these areas? So anyway, I just think it's nice to see an illustration sometimes of like, what even are we talking about? And it is possible to get to that level of even this understanding. I'm going to stop sharing. Do you guys have any questions or feedback you want to give now and or where you want to go with any of that?
Well, I just have to say it's very impressive and very great. And wouldn't it be great just to be able to hit a button and get those kind of reports? Instead of how long did she spend
Totally.
analyzing and you had to do a public disclosure request to get the data? I mean,
Right.
there must be at least maybe 2 buttons. Okay, so
Right. Yeah.
Harry.
Yes, some great information, Heather, and and a great point. I appreciate you bringing it up, and I was curious, maybe in this whole process when that occurred, and sort of gathering the data and so forth, any information relative to other counties. It'd just be interesting to compare, obviously, sort of similar, demographics and and et cetera, just to understand, oh boy, that's pretty common across counties, and et cetera. But I don't know if other counties have, the kind of base information data that you were showing to be able to compare it to. So maybe it just makes, another layer of challenge. But that's one of the things that came up for me. So thank you.
Thanks for saying that, Perry. And there are counties that do have really nice dashboards that we could reach out to and say, hey, how did you construct this? And there are, Oregon has some interesting dashboards. But that's exactly the kind of question that I would hope having some meaningful data like this to look at would spur to say, well, what is Skagit doing differently than us? Or who has something in place that could really help? So we did not do any county comparisons. We were pretty exhausted by this spreadsheet by the end of this analysis. I'll just tell you that. So
Can imagine. Dan.
Heather, when was that, the data that you just showed, when were they collected?
that was January 2020 through June 2021
Okay.
snapshot.
Okay. And do you have plans for updating that data based on the changes in policy that have occurred? I mean, City of Bellingham, public use of drugs is a misdemeanor, and then the state ledge created civil possession as a gross misdemeanor. Do you have plans to update that?
We could. We don't currently in our Chuckanut work plan have that as a to-do item. What I'd rather do though is work with the Caleb's of the world to say, can you now take your data and do the same generative report and maybe Chuckanet funds an intern to help with that, right? It can be a partnership, but I want to start to institutionalize this kind of reporting. And maybe instead of asking our data people all the time, create the dashboard and they get tripped up on the technicalities and the agreements and the legalities, maybe it's just a quarterly report like this that comes to the task force. And we just ask for that, can you do that analysis and show us the trends and the top bookings of this last quarter and what they don't give you in the spreadsheet is demographics. And so to your question about GARE, first of all, it'd be really great to have a GARE subgroup just look at jail data and kind of the data integrity around that and any racial equity issues. But second of all, I would love to drill down into that. I've heard, well, we don't have, the FBI form doesn't ask for demographics anymore, so we don't actually ask for that in the jail. And I'm not sure if that's true. And so, like, should we be asking for that and analyzing that? And can the task force play a role in a policy space to ask for that, right? So
Yeah, so I didn't mean to put Chuckanet on the spot there in terms of like, coming
no,
up
I know.
generative, but I do think that the index committee could be the place where this kind of information is generated from and should for the purposes of the task force. There's a lot of questions that I have, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, speaking of that, we have 5 more items on our agenda and just a little
Sorry.
over 35 minutes. So
Right.
I'm gonna just go to Mike and Peter, and then we're gonna move on. Mike?
All right, very briefly, you pretty much answered my questions with the demographic piece, Heather, and why that data wasn't there. I do also remember now that you mentioned that we weren't even capturing that, which is unfathomable to me, but it happened. And I really appreciate that you brought up GARE, because one of the reasons why we invited Gordon, right, the then director of GARE, to come and talk to us, and why Whatcom County joined, was the support of a cohort of other communities going through the same thing. So this is a little bit about what Perry was talking about, not just neighboring counties, but maybe is there a group of other professionals in other jurisdictions throughout the country that have gone through the same thing that might really help index in this journey. And I just want to applaud all of it. I think, just very quickly, you also showed exactly your point. I think Bertie made the point, but seeing some data generates conversations and it made things go. And I really like the idea of that, of starting, and this committee has used this term a lot, low-hanging fruit, but start with that and then go from there. And I think it's going to make people, instead of feel frustrated, they might feel some excitement about possibilities, then help build momentum and maybe get people under the tent to help. So anyways, thank you for what you're all doing. And I really hope that that group can engage directly with GARE and a cohort specifically looking at data that includes demographics.
You, Mike?
Yeah, go ahead, Heather. Did you have something?
No, I see Peter's hands up. I was just going to close out on our co-chair presentation, but Peter, maybe you're going to do that next.
Oh, I just wanted to make the point, and Dan, I know you were not saying that it's incumbent upon Chucknet Health to do this sort of work, but rather it is the county and it is the index committee that should be designing this and pushing it forward. And to that end, Caleb and Perry Rice have a prototype of information, or of a dashboard that I have not yet seen. I've asked to see it numerous times. I think Tank needs to see it first before the rest of us can. And so I know that that's queued up and it's a good starting place. And soon the conversation will be moving forward apace. And that's my intention and hope for the index committee and our work. So that's, I don't have anything more on that, and we can move to other agenda items.
I think the more we talk, the more I and I'm sure everyone else sees how important the index committee is. It seems like every conversation I have points to that aspect of how important it is. And I'm so glad, Bertie, you're going to dig in and really whip them into shape and get things done. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
But
Our next item. Our next
think
item
covered
is
it.
the annual report. What did you want to say, Heather?
I was just gonna say, today we did kind of deep dived into the index, but the overall, I think, underline of this co-chair report is that we would like to visit with each committee and bring information back to steering to help develop, like, what are those top 3 goals and milestones for the year that the task force can really focus on. And obviously steering has a lot of important input into that. So that's kind of the work of the next little phase. So thanks for letting us present.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the annual report, Jill.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to screen share here for a minute. My goal today is to get committee approval on content outline, format, and timeline for the annual report, which is due at the end of June. Historically, the annual report format has been a report by task force and then the committees. So here's what the task force has done. Here's what behavioral health committee has done. Here's what legal justice has done, et cetera, et cetera. In looking at the agendas over the past year, a lot of specific topics have been shared across committees. So I'm suggesting that for this year, the annual report, instead of being organized by group, we organize it by topic. And you'll see on your screen here the list of the topics that have been discussed over the past year. So that's my first question on format, is if you all are okay with kind of changing it up this year to be more topic organized rather than group organized.
I just had one quick question before I call on Dan, and that is this going to be the same kind of a presentation that council gets every summer at the annual report where the co-chairs present this?
I haven't even thought about that. That's something that Stephen and Jack always took on their own, was doing presentations to both county council and also Bellingham City Council.
Well, the reason I asked is if our co-chairs are going to present, I would definitely rely on what they're comfortable with presenting. I like the topic oriented things. I think it orients people better, but I want to make sure they feel good about what they have in their toolbox. Dan?
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, my computer's gonna run out of juice here real quick, so I'm gonna be on the move here to plug it back in. But I think that this format works pretty well. As you said, Jill, we have so many topics that get spread across multiple committees, and it makes it sort of repetitive when we try to talk about that. And I think that's an artificial segregation that we no longer need. I think that if the co-chairs are comfortable with this more topical presentation, and I'm very supportive of it.
Yep, me too. What's
Great.
everybody else think? Dan, Mike, there's a thumbs up. Heather's a thumbs up. All right, sounds like a winner.
Great, thank you, everyone.
Sorry, I'm driving, so unable to use my buttons, but I give it a big thumbs up and am happy to take what we come up with and absolutely present to whomever. And to that end, I think that one thing that I'm very intent upon is presenting to what we're working on to the public as well. And so I'm definitely looking for opportunities for us to do that.
Thank you, Peter. That kind of brings up my next point on content. Is in the past, the committee chairs have written their content for their committees. That's one of the reasons that it was organized that way. Because the committee chairs have been responsible for authoring a majority of the content. So I'm looking towards everyone here to maybe take on one of these topics or two and do up just I don't know, 2, 3, 4 paragraph very basic explanation, and Jenna, you can jump in here as you're our communications person, but simple summary of the topic, challenges and or progress made, what the task force has done on these things, that kind of thing.
I can see some I'd volunteer to take.
Go ahead.
I would take, obviously, the fentanyl emergency resolution. I would take, Perry and I could work together on the competency restoration and the pretrial processes work group.
Mhm.
And I could co-author something with someone on the implementation plan. I think I would like to do it that way.
I would love to work on the implementation plan with you, Barry.
Awesome. That would be perfect, Peter.
Peter and Heather and Bertie, item number 6, new leadership. I think that would be a great
Mhm.
for you guys to really go into some details about what your plans are for working with the committees and the task force. Is that something you all would be willing to do?
Sure.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. The other
And I
thing,
want,
go ahead.
go ahead, Birdie.
No,
You
go
go.
ahead. I'm changing the subject a little, so you go, Heather.
I also wonder if this could be a nice invitation to Jack and Stephen to do like a little handoff and maybe honor their service and their legacy they're leaving too. Okay.
I like that.
Bertie, do you got?
Yeah, the only thing, I was looking down the top 10 topics, and I would suggest we include a topic on data. And the reason I say that is, as a member of the public until very recently, as opposed to the committee, I was always reading the reports, looking to see what the status was of getting public-facing data and dashboards, and it seemed like it was never in it. And I think it's something that the public is very interested in. So if we include it as a topic in our report, they can at least see that we identify it as an issue and are working on it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bertie, and feel free for all of you to include comments on what's coming up in the next year for the task force. I think that would be a great topic.
Mhm.
Bertie, Index hasn't met a lot over the past year. I think maybe only
Well, I know, that's right.
right? So would
Right.
you like to author a section on data as
I
the new
certainly
chair?
could, and exactly, and include sort of where we're heading as well as what's
Yeah.
Sure.
So is that something you'd like to take on?
Yes, I would.
Excellent. Thank you. Perry, are you comfortable taking on 1 and 2 as you've been closest to and involved in those conversations?
That makes a lot of sense, Jill. And geez, since you're asking me in front of all these important people, how do I say no, to you? I mean, it's not, all kinds of pressure there. And I'm also open to number 10. 3 to 4 paragraphs as I'm understanding it.
Yes.
The other thing I was going to ask, like a typical school child, is when is the assignment due, or at least a rough draft due? I need to frame up my my to-do list.
Sure, that's our next topic, and final topic would be the timeline. And yeah, let me stress that these don't have to be fancy language. You don't have to pretty it up. You can just get it to Jenna and I, and we will organize it and compile everything and finesse the language. So it doesn't have to be, it can easily be just draft. If you just want to hit your major points, that would be fantastic. I think I could probably reach out to Maya for number 4.
Yeah.
And the rest I can, if I don't have any takers for the rest today, then I will reach out to some folks to do that. Are there any topics that anyone else would like to include that you don't see here on the list?
Yeah, talk about Go ahead,
Jill,
Peter.
sorry about that. I just have to be on the road right now, so I'm not looking at this list. But when I do stop, I will look through it and be happy to take on some assignments.
That'd be great. Thank you, Peter.
So Jill, I have one idea for number 3.
Uh-huh.
Isn't Kayla part of this group?
Tyler has been, when the steering committee was first formed, he hasn't been participating, as you know, for the past couple of years. We haven't formally invited Kayla, but we can do that.
Because she's pretty close to a lot of the things around. I was going to say maybe she could co-author the legislative agenda
Sure, sure.
with someone from the task force.
Yeah, I'll ask her, and I can also take some of the handouts that she's submitted. We can take some content from there. And honestly, a lot of the content, a good source for background for these have been the meeting summaries where these have been discussed. And you can go there and crib that content for your reports as well, if you'd like to.
Okay, sounds good.
So the agenda or the proposed timeline, no, wrong way, right here. So April steering committee structure and topic, that's today. We'll take these topics to the committees and over April, really April and May, get their approval, recruit other authors as necessary. Perry, to answer your questions, ideally submissions would be due April 29th. So I can get the first draft together for steering committee at its meeting next month.
Well chosen, Jill. I'm going to take 2 weeks off starting the following day. So I think it's wise to get that from me before the fishing season opens on May
I was going to
1st.
say you had 2 weeks to work on it while you're not at work.
I planned that just for you, Perry.
Yeah, perfect.
Does this look like a reasonable schedule to everyone? Yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna be tight for me, but
Yeah, me too.
I got a trip that week.
You've got staff too, Barry.
I do. Yeah, that's true. Thank you for
Do
volunteering.
what you
Jill.
can. Yeah, sure. Do what you can. And I will send out later today a list and the deadline, so you have that in your inbox. You can print out as you feel necessary. So thank you, everyone. That's it for me on this item.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Recruiting and succession planning. Mr. Hamill, that was from you.
Yes, we need to do that. So that's kind of the short introductory item for that, is that we've lost people over the last several years, and just in my committee alone, or Mike's in my committee and the behavioral health committee, we've lost really key people. And so what I want to do is to kind of have a broader discussion about how we can bring people in and what our strategies are on that in terms of diversity, service providers, subject matter experts, people that work in the field, people that are justice affected. Like how do we engage folks, and how can we be more intentional about that? That's really the gist of it. It's really that simple. So I just wanted to put that out there for discussion today.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. We got really pretty stressed out at the end of last year trying to figure this out, and because we had no plan.
Yeah, and I think that was very apparent when it came to the co-chairs. We kind of like took it up to the 11th hour, and I think that that doesn't benefit the work that we do. And when it comes to the committee structures, making sure that we have healthy debates and that we're generative. That's one of the items for the behavioral health committee coming up, is how can we be more proactive and less and less kind of like presentation oriented. And and a lot of things have really come out of this this task force in some way, shape, or form. Grace Lead ART have kind of evolved from Andy Center, the electronic home monitoring. There's been a number of different things that have come out of this task force. And I want to keep that flow going, recognizing that a lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been harvested, so to speak. But I do think that we should and could keep moving on that front.
Agree with you 100%. Jill?
Thank you, Bear. I just wanted to let those of you know who haven't heard, last night County Council appointed the members of the Whatcom Racial Equity Commission, and congratulations, Heather. I know that's a big accomplishment for you. One of my to-do items for a number of years now has been to work with the REC to improve county's recruiting for boards and commissions overall. And so I guess in partial answer to your question, Dan, that's something that I'm hoping to really engage the REC in doing, is increasing our diversity in recruitment.
Heather, is there a plan when they're going to be seated and have their first session?
Yeah, we're doing outreach. Well, so the City of Bellingham Council has to
Oh, that's right.
also agree to appoint next week. And if that goes well, we will do the outreach, and the first commission meeting is scheduled for, I think, May 14th or 15th. So
that's
pretty
great.
quick. Yeah.
That's great to
Yeah.
hear.
And where there's a press release ready to go to also announce the launching of the ED position. So we will be hiring for that as well.
Great. Peter?
I cannot remember which meeting it was, but some of you were there in the last few weeks where there was discussion about just how many great people stepped forward for membership on the IPR. And so we need to be circling back to some pretty stellar people who were not chosen because we didn't have enough positions for them. And then perhaps, that might be a great place to start.
Yeah, I think Jill followed up with some of them on the J-pop. Is that?
Yeah, that was the discussion you're remembering, Peter, with our last planning team meeting. And I did send Heather some information for her to forward to those individuals and to invite them to apply to J-pop. But yeah, they can, they can express an interest in one of the subcommittees as well, like Dan is asking for, if they want to reach out and possibly be invited to those memberships.
And that's all of our jobs, to make sure that we're finding good people to come onto the task force to be effective. So anything
In
else?
I just wanted to make one more point on that, Barry.
Go ahead, Peter.
In the last 3-4 months, I've been doing just a whole host of interviews with all sorts of people around these topics. And I think that my list of interviewees might be an interesting place to start as well, because I've reached out to a lot of frontline workers who have just a great fund of knowledge on some of these topics. I'm thinking about behavioral health, Dan, for instance, and I do have some really good ideas, I believe, for recruitment there, and that is definitely some voices that we need on these committees. So I'll circle back with you on that.
Okay, great.
Thanks. And then just one, I know that we're kind of running out of time here, but I just real quick, just one point that I think that we need to really consider, since it came up, the Racial Equity Commission. What is the interaction between that commission and this task force, and how do we work with them and collaborate and move items forward? I discussed that with my staff today for the city council, and I think that we have an opportunity here to engage those members or that commission, but also potentially and maybe engage some of those folks as members of this task force. And Barry, you're right. Each committee chair is responsible for recruiting for their own subcommittees, and I will continue to do that as best I can.
Great. Anything else on succession planning, recruiting? We've kind of already started talking a little bit about what I had on the justice implementation plan, which isn't much other than the council yesterday, I know the question had been floating out there, who is going to appoint the J-pop because of some ambiguity in the ordinance. And the council voted 7-0 last night for us, the council, to continue the appointment process of the J-pop. We had already started it. So we have the infrastructure in place. We have the people to review all the applications and do all the proper redacting and things that need to be done to get before the council. So it's probably a lot more efficient, but we will certainly be looking for input from everybody in this room when those lists get put together to get your thoughts. So the other piece on the Justice Project is the RFP for the facilitation. And Jill, can you give us an update on that?
Sadly, there is no update. It's still at the financing department with the county. So I'm still waiting for their review. Our purchasing supervisor has been out of the office for a few weeks. And so.
Well, I think that is the update. I don't think we've talked about that in this group yet.
Okay.
So we've
Okay.
moved it that far. It's been through legal, right?
It has, yes, I think it's been through legal. But I will have to double check on that, Barry. But in your packet, if you want me to screen share, I can, is a summary of the 4 major work areas that we're assigning to the facilitator. And I'm not going to go through them in detail, but in short, the person will be responsible for seating the J-pop committee. We've got almost all the committee members appointed. So now they need to do the legwork of seating J-pop, including, organizing meetings and charters and bylaws and that kind of thing. They will be facilitating the Justice Project, the J-pop committee, and the IPRTF, and they will also be participating in the planning team and the steering committee meetings. They will be engaging in implementation plan, project review, and coordination. So they're going to run all of the administrative work for the J-pop committee. They're also going to do, research and liaise with the executive's office on gathering information, that kind of thing. They'll be working on annual reports in collaboration with the health department on the CHA as discussed today, and also project metrics and tracking in collaboration with the exec's office data team. So those are the big to-do tasks for our facilitator.
So I'm going to kind of meld this next, I know we're just about out of time, but the next piece, I've got communications and public outreach. I think we can hold the communications discussion because that can be had at our next meeting. But the public outreach, the reason I put that down was after talking to Peter the other day about an idea about that he and Bertie and Heather had come up with about some focus groups and how that might be facilitated through our work with the facilitator. So we just wanted to make sure we got that on our radar real quick before this RFP is released and see if there's something we may want to add to it, or does some of that work that you talked about, coordination, could that encompass some of this? I'm just not quite sure of how labor intensive the focus groups that you guys have kind of thought up. How is that an ongoing thing? Is that something that's, how much time is it going to take? So maybe if you could just give us a little quick overview of your thinking there, it'd be helpful.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. So I generated this idea. I got thumbs up from Heather and Bertie in our meeting, just to explain what it might be. One of the issues in any large organization is the level 6 problem, as it's often referred to, where the folks who are making the decisions at the top are not getting proper information from level 6 levels down, which is in our case frontline workers in criminal justice, behavioral health, EMS, etc., and also folks who have lived experience, as we've referred to it now, and a easy methodology that's proven out in product development is focus groups, and you have a panel of folks that you in these two groups that I'm talking about that you kind of keep that you recruit. They typically get a small stipend of something like $100 or something that's meaningful to them for their time. And then you have a guided discussion. Now, what would be discussed would be quite possibly program ideas that we are considering, or things that we're wrestling with in policy and in implementation, and it would be great opportunity for us to bring that forward to a table of people who are living it and working it, and then getting their feedback, their ideas, and then bringing them up 6 levels, if you will, to our group. And that is how you, through a continuous cycle of doing this, you make sure that you're getting all the best expertise from throughout the system. So that's the concept. And I could write up a little proposal, I think, that would maybe go into some of the details that could determine, how often we do it, best practices, and how many hours it might take. That's the idea.
So I'd like to get Jill's reaction to that. And we took on many extra tasks like this during the implementation phase of the Justice Project, and that we did some contract amendments. That's one thing we could think about doing, but it's always better to identify things up front if we can. But I don't, given the fact that this has already been through legal, now it's into finance, I'm not sure. I just want to hear from Jill.
I would want to have a conversation with Kathy Halka, as the SAC went through a similar process and hired a contractor specifically to do focus groups. I have no idea on whether the skill set would be the same for this RFP, or if it would be a different focus group, or excuse me, a different facilitator contract. I think adding it to this RFP would be a significant delay. And we'd have
That's
to get
my fear too.
approval.
That's my fear, because the J-pop work needs to get going.
It does, yeah, and we also would need to get approval from the exec's office to spend jail fund money on something like that. Council can't, we don't have the money to do something like that. So I think we would need to hear from Kathy on her thoughts and her experiences in working with a facilitator to do focus groups, and also to Kayla in terms of funding. If the steering committee wants to work it into this RFP, that's fine, we can delay it, but just be aware of that. Or we can create a whole separate contract.
I don't think the council would like to delay it. I think the council wants to get the J-pop seated and working, but I don't want to abandon the idea. Believe me, I think that's a great idea, and that we could figure out a way to work it in.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a way to work it into the regular J-pop committee meetings, where they invite your focus group participants to a particular J-pop meeting. Maybe that might be an option. I just don't know much about what's involved in creating focus groups. I think it's
that probably would not work, because in a focus group you can create the environment where people who are not used to large meetings and speaking up at meetings are made comfortable in participating. But we're not talking about some huge lift here. Let me put together a proposal. I'd be happy to talk with whomever about it, including Barry, Jill, Kathy, and I know that the ROI on this spend would be significant. So let me do a little work on that, and so you have some definition.
Sounds good, Peter.
Yeah, Peter, I think we can explore it further. We'll have a little more information in 2 weeks at our next planning team meeting as well. So that'll be another opportunity to think about it.
Okay, so let's move on to items for next task force agenda. We have down here election of a vice chair. I spoke with Peter about this the other day, and I'm fine electing a vice chair, but I'm also fine in electing a third co-chair if that's makes more sense. The reason I say that is because it's in the enabling ordinance. All it says is the IPTRF shall elect co-chairs. It doesn't say how many, so we would be within the scope of the ordinance to for the task force to be able to do that. But I don't have a preference either way. It just seemed to me like it was a little more meaningful to have another co-chair maybe than a vice chair. I don't know. I'll leave it up to you all on that. What do you think?
I will say that the rules of procedure for the task force I believe they do specify 2 co-chairs.
They do say two.
I think it does. Yeah, I'd have to look it up, but
Okay, I just thought it said
either way, we can
co-chairs.
amend that as well too.
That's
So.
true. So, what do you guys think? Bertie, you would be the one that we would be putting forward. What do you think? Ken, you're muted. You're still muted. You're still muted.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
I am open. I mean, I'm interested in putting in the time. I think Heather and Peter and I have a good working relationship and we thought partner together well. Without the title, I feel at times a little awkward not wanting to be an interloper or an unelected intruder in the leadership. And so I would really rely on the will of the task force and on Peter and Heather, I think.
For my part, I would really like to see Bertie as a vice chair. I think that there is so much work. There's so much work with this this co-chair role, I must say, and Heather's going to need some time off. You know, there's no end to it, and we could use the help. I'm going to let Heather speak for herself, obviously here, but I really do like the idea of having a third partner and somebody who can step in when I go sailing in the fall up to Desolation Sound for 3 weeks and can't make every single meeting, for instance. So I'm just going to say.
So you'd prefer a vice chair over a third co-chair?
Barry, could I chime in a little bit too?
Yeah.
I wonder, so I'll just be really frank. I don't want it to be an awkward thing. Like it's just awkward sometimes. And so I think that I wonder, Bertie, what you think about and the awkwardness, I guess I would predict is that we just had this vote at the last task force meeting. If we came back at the next task force meeting and said, we still want to put out this vote. And it just, I don't know, it feels, what if though, we like me, you and Peter are going to work together, period. That's clear. We want to work together and the task force can know that. You're the co-chair now of the index subcommittee. What if we took 4 months to kind of see how workload settles out and then decide, okay, is it a vice chair? Is it like a de facto vice chair that we don't even need a vote on? Or that we need to insert something procedurally and Jill Nixon can help us with that? Or is it a third co-chair? And so just like planting the seed now for us all to think about versus forcing it for the next task force meeting. and I'm open to all of it. I'm going to work with you no matter what. And I know that you've said the title doesn't matter as much, but I also understand that the title gets you the opportunity to speak in a, in a space where you're supposed to, a designated space, right? And that's also awkward for you to not have that. So I totally hear you, and just laying it out. The
Yeah,
people I love aside, like putting it on paper, does it make sense to wait a couple months and just see how things shake out and then put forth a recommendation or a vote?
Well, yeah, I think maybe we should circle back and talk about this again. I have to go. Dan, quickly.
Yeah, just real quick. So the task force has spoken. We took a vote last time and the vote was clear. And I just want to, I think like trying to rearrange that vote is, I am not okay with that at all. And this has nothing to do with any person or personality that's in the room today. And all of us can put in the work and put in the time. I do think that I would support Heather's recommendation that we circle back on this and reconsider it later. I do not feel comfortable going back to the task force and saying, "Hey, your vote didn't matter last time. Let's do it again." So I'm not okay with that. So I would say let's wait a little bit and let's see what shakes out.
Let's just keep that on our radar then, and we'll watch that workload.
Barry,
All right.
Barry, before you go, do you want the fentanyl issue on the task force agenda?
There's not much to say other than it passed. We've already talked through the details. We can just maybe just mention it briefly during
During reports?
yeah.
Okay. And my last question for the agenda, Dan, you had asked about putting a presentation on there about the downtown initiative.
Yeah, so the executive order that was issued by Mayor Lund has resulted in a reduction in responses from both fire and police. And so I'd like to check back in on that.
Yeah, can you, or maybe I'll check in with Iris to email me that executive order, and I will attempt to schedule the mayor and chief for that presentation in April. If not, we'll schedule it for May.
I would, yes, please follow up with Iris Knott to get the mayor, and I would get the fire chief or Chief Rickman would be another person, or Scott Farrell. He's the head of 106, our firefighters union. They would all have insight, and any one of those would work, but I would start with the chiefs.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Jill, do we have any members of the public here that would like to testify?
Sorry, no, we don't have any attendees today.
Okay. Hey, good discussions today, everybody. Thanks for putting in the time, and we will see you all down the road. We're adjourned.
thank you.